Strap in, bucko, because things are about to get hot. Now, if you've been following us for a while on Instagram, you may be familiar with one of our team's most iconic projects, Tau in the Hoodoo Desert. And we had to paint a lot of these things, so making sure that the process was both efficient and epic was key to getting things done. Now, when it comes to basing an army like this, rendering out every little detail on your bases may not be where you want to spend your limited time. Or perhaps it is worth it for that extra level up. In this video, we're going to take a look at a progressive approach to painting this Hoodoo environment so that you can stop whenever you're satisfied or keep going with additional layers and make it even more epic. You decide when you've hit that sweet spot. Let's dive in. All right, so we're gonna start off with a coat of airbrush primer, and here we're just using the Vallejo Black, making sure to hit all of the undersides of the bits and the base. And then for our lighter color primer, we're not gonna be going with a pure white. We're gonna actually mix in a little bit of vat orange and diarylide yellow. And this is just gonna help us tint everything towards a warm red, which is going to set the foundation for this scheme and harmonize all of our colors. Now, technically we will lose a bit of contrast than if we were to hit this with just a pure white and then do a transparent coat on top of it, but I think the speed gained in this method is well worth it. And now we're on to the Washcoat stage, and we're gonna be creating a mixture using these three colors, and we're aiming for something that's kind of a yellow-orange. Although, even if you don't mix it perfectly every single time, a tiny bit of variation just adds to the interest and variety among the bases in your army, so don't sweat getting it perfect every single time. However, one of the keys to this Washcoat technique is to make sure that you're working with paints that have some transparency. And it's not that you can't do this with more opaque hobby paints. However, their opacity will diminish some of the contrast that was established in the airbrush stage. Now on to some of the colors of the Cactus. So the main thing here is not to use too pure of a green. We want to use some of the browns to knock back the saturation and intensity of that green and bring it more in line with the rest of the colors on the base so that it's not standing out or being too garish. Even for the Agave, though we're going to introduce some cooler tones, we're knocking it back with that burnt sienna just to make sure that it's not jumping out too much or going to be distracting from your models. And now to bring it all together, we're going to be doing an Airbrush Shadow. And yeah, technically we already had some shadows from the primer stage, but this step is just gonna help clean up any of the messy shadows that were created from the Washcoat layer. It's gonna richen the colors and just enhance the contrast. And yes, technically you can do this with a model on the base too. Just make sure that you're focusing on the undersides and the back, and this is also gonna help to unify your colors. And just in case you don't have golden acrylics, you can do this with contrast paints or express colors. The main thing here is just to try to match the intensity of that yellow-orange. And as I mentioned before, it's important to work with paints that have transparency like these express colors so that you're maintaining the contrast of the primer layer underneath. And here you can clearly see how that airbrush shadow adds richness to those shadows. So as long as you follow these principles, the difference between the paints you use is going to be barely noticeable. After painting the base rims at this stage, we could call this done. There's enough definition here to give you a very high tabletop quality look, and it will allow your models themselves to stand out even more if they're rendered to a higher degree. So if you're looking for fast and effective results, this might be the strategy for you. You could work through an army's worth of these bases in an afternoon easily. So how do you know when and what to render further? Well, if you're gonna spend more time detailing your bases, you wanna make sure that whatever time you do spend gets you the most impact. Maybe you have an attractive detail that adds an important accent color to your model scheme and you want to bring attention to that by rendering out a little bit further. Whereas maybe the rocks or ground actually benefit from having more of a subdued importance. When you're working at scale, there's no point in spending extra time on stuff that's only going to slightly improve your results. Again, sometimes leaving things less defined can even enhance the mood that the base delivers, while defining each detail might make it individually more interesting, but at the cost of losing some of that mood. But should you wish to take on that adventure nonetheless, let's take a look at some rendering techniques that will help each of those bits shine. Let's start things off by detailing some of our Deadwood bits. Now, when it comes to army painting and painting a lot of bases, you want to focus on highlighting. And this is simply because it's the easiest part of your model to reach. And staying along those top surfaces is going to help you move quickly and efficiently. Now, if you really want to take it an extra step further, we can add a second layer of highlight. Now just going in and using the same technique, but focusing on a smaller surface area, but still nonetheless staying on the top surfaces of those details. Now let's take a look at an example of this on a larger piece like this Deadwood tree. But again, we're using the same technique of focusing on the highlights where we can leverage our brush at certain angles to dab the paint, to draw lines, and move across surfaces quickly rather than trying to meticulously place the brush in blending midtones and shadows. Especially if you hit it with that extra layer of highlight, this is going to result in a very high quality look compared to the relative amount of time and effort it takes to execute. Now, of course, larger pieces like this Deadwood tree are going to take a bit more rendering time, but they're not going to be on every base. All right, let's move on to working on our cactuses, and we're going to be starting from that same desaturated green while adding in some yellow to our highlights to help warm it up and unify it with our environment. Now, when painting the cactus, it's actually more interesting to focus on the recesses as well as hitting some of the spikes and top surfaces of those cacti. Now, if you want to add in an extra bit of pop to those cactus needles, you can mix in some more white for your highlight, as well as add some yellow greens to enhance the contrast. Now, something like these fence post cactuses, you're really gonna have to focus on the recesses of those shapes as well as the rows of spikes to give them some definition, especially since they don't have those voluminous shapes like these bunny ear and barrel cactuses. And actually the barrel cactuses look kind of cool with the darker spines too. And now onto our last major detail, the agave, which we're going to be starting from a cooler base, but remember to warm up those highlights with your yellows and browns. Now, when it comes to the agave, the size is really going to impact the technique. On smaller pieces like these, you really have to focus on the edges with a strong spot highlight on the spikes to really make them feel sharp. It's also really helpful to add a highlight to the inner portion of the petals, and this is just going to catch the light beautifully, and it's a lot easier to do the larger that the plant is. And then you can finish things off and continue refining it by adding some sharper highlights to the tips of the plant and the spikes around the sides. All right, now remember I said that with stuff like the rocks and the ground, sometimes less is more, but if you do want to add some highlights to it, you can focus on some of the rock pieces that are more in the foreground, and you can just kind of dab at it with the side of the brush to pick up those edges really quickly. And this just gets you an extra bit of definition where it's going to be most noticeable. And here's our leveled up trio of bases next to our previous vanilla result. And though there's definitely a difference in the quality, the vanilla will still look great on a tabletop and will save you a ton of time. I hope this process has helped you see how you can create the most impactful thematic bases and make efficient use of the time that you have to spend. Army painting can be a daunting task, so it's always important to keep things moving along at a pace that lets you stay motivated, helps you feel like you're getting stuff done, and most importantly, delivers a result that you're happy with. If you like this type of content and hobby tips, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and drop us a comment down below if you have a particular hobby or basing tip that you'd like to see us cover in the future. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to everyone who has subscribed already and to all of you who have left us comments and suggestions and helped this channel grow so quickly. We truly appreciate your support. All right, until next time, my friends, go make it epic.